Yeah, as you have drawn on some of the key themes there that came up, not least of all this issue of potentially chemical weapons. We know the United States, Colin, have flagged this in the last couple of weeks as something they think is possible by Russia, with its back somewhat against the wall, given the fact that this military campaign in Ukraine does not seem to go in as well as they had hoped. The Prime Minister insisting that there would be serious consequences if biological or chemical weapons were used in Ukraine. He would be drawn on what the details of that would be, but he was pretty clear that there would be consequences. However, he wanted to focus on what he called the already barbaric acts that are taking place through conventional warfare, if you like, in many of Ukraine's major cities. Also interesting, as you drew upon there as well, Colin, this idea, and we heard it from the Kremlin earlier on this week, that in many ways Boris Johnson was seen, at least by the Putin regime, to be leading the kind of anti-Russian campaign, if you like. As you say, many will want Boris Johnson maybe to potentially wear that as a badge of honour, not being anti-Russian, but very much anti this war and anti-Putin in all of this. This comes, of course, in the context that Boris Johnson's been at a NATO summit earlier on today, involving all NATO leaders, including President Joe Biden, who's flown over from the United States, his first time in Europe since the war in Ukraine began. And it also came with an announcement today from NATO that they will be expanding quite significantly the number of battalions, if you like, on their eastern flank, that is in countries like Slovakia, Hungary, Romania and Bulgaria, doubling from 4 to 8, tens of thousands of extra NATO troops based in these countries, again trying to send a warning to Russia. Tonight, Boris Johnson is heading back to London, but EU leaders are meeting here in Brussels along with President Biden. President Zelensky expected to dial into that leaders' meeting. He will, of course, again call for a no-fly zone, for more military equipment. Boris Johnson, during that press conference, again insisting that a no-fly zone risks increasing the possibility of this becoming an all-out war with Russia, something NATO at the moment is clearly very determined to try and avoid.
And just on the point of detail about that British deployment of forces to Bulgaria that the Prime Minister mentioned, I mean, you know, if you're a relative of a young soldier who's at Tidworth Garrison or Catterick Garrison or one of the big sprawling army camps in the UK, you're listening to these words really intently. This isn't just rabble-rousing rhetoric from the Prime Minister. This is actually the deployment of British service personnel to foreign lands. Now, the Prime Minister there said there'd be a new deployment of UK troops in Bulgaria. Reuters reporting 2 or 3 hours ago the Bulgarian leader saying that amounts to just 150 troops, as opposed to, say, more than 1,000 American soldiers who are going to Bulgaria. So he's happy to talk about a new deployment of British troops, but actually when you look at it in the round, 150 soldiers, it's not going to change that much.
Yeah, I think largely this is symbolic to a degree, Colin. It is about sending that message to Moscow, and we've heard that if you put a toe cap essentially across a NATO border, well then you are then at war with NATO. It is an act of deterrence in some regards. You know, there is no prospect at this moment in time that somehow NATO is going to get involved in that conflict with Russia directly. But it does have consequences, and we are sending British soldiers not quite to the front line, but to the front of the NATO line, if you like, though many of them have been there for quite a long period of time. We've been carrying out quite extensive exercises, particularly with the Baltic states in recent years. I think they're talking about upwards, there were 40,000 extra troops from across NATO countries descending on Eastern Europe. So the overall numbers are quite significant. But at the moment, the UK's focus, I think, Colin, is trying to supply the Ukrainians with even more arms, given the relative military success so far, even suggestions in the last couple of days that they're actually going on the offensive against Russia. And that is why the UK is committing, I think, 6,000 extra missiles, 25 million quid, Boris Johnson said today, to help pay for some of the Ukrainian soldiers' wages and extra rationing as well. And calls as well, interestingly, and there is a bit of a divide on this, I think, for Britain and the United States, calling on countries like Germany and France to do even more in terms of that military supply. And that's aside from the discussion tonight that EU leaders are going to have on greater sanctions, particularly around Russian oil and gas.